Again, live podcast with our host, Meir Halevi Weinstein. We're going to do a little intro so you all get tuned in. Share this with your friends on your computers, your laptops, your PCs, your cell phones, or whatever means you could figure out to join us and support us and help fight anti-Semitism. I see some of you all just tuned in, so we'll slow down a little bit so more people can click on. A lot has gone on, as always, in Israel and internationally regarding Judaism, Zionism, and anti-Semitism. We'll be getting to that momentarily. Do go to our Facebook page, Israel Now, our Facebook page, Never Again, our YouTube channel, as well as our website, israelnow.ca. We're coming live from Israel as well as from South Texas. We have Meir Weinstein in Israel, with a guest we'll introduce later on in the program. Today we're going to focus on the normalization of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is no longer hiding in the shadows. It's actually creeping out from all its crevices and becoming quite accepted. Our host, Meir Halevi Weinstein, will talk about that in detail later in the program. And I'm Dr. B over here hiding in the corner. So from South Texas to Jerusalem. Some people ask what we have in common in South Texas with Israel. So we like to think of ourselves as the other Lone Star State. We all heard about the tragedy, the Al Jazeera reporter who was shot dead while she was covering basically a war zone between the Palestinian terrorists and Israeli police. And of course, before the news even hit the international media, Israel was accused of assassinating somebody, which is the furthest thing from the truth. Al Jazeera wants a thorough investigation. So how can we do a thorough investigation when the Palestinian Authority will not let us see the body or the bullet or do any examination? Of course, the Associated Press even is probing to Israel gunfire and death of the journalist. And even Haaretz says the Israeli military will not conduct a criminal probe. Well, we can't conduct a criminal probe if we don't have the body, the bullet, or the autopsy results. So I wonder what they're hiding, why the Palestinian Authority is choosing not to let us have access to the body. And then, of course, it gets followed up by Israeli police beat mourners at the funeral, which also is not true. Before there was any violence at the funeral, they were hurling rocks and boulders at the Israeli police and using the coffin of the woman who just died to push police and to hit them with the actual coffin as Palestinians tried to steal the coffin.
صوب واحد صوب جندي مرمي على الارض.
So again, is there some reason that the Palestinian Authority will not let us see the coffin, the body, the autopsy results, or the bullet? And how do they expect us to perform a thorough investigation? All videos taken from the scene presently seem to point to some Palestinian terrorists with M16 rifles who shot the 5.56 round which killed the journalist. And a tragedy it is, no doubt. It is a tragedy when anybody dies in wartime, whether they're soldiers, civilians, or journalists. Journalists do take the bravery of actually being in these war-torn zones. It's a tragedy that this journalist perished. But why is it that this journalist is getting so much attention when sadly journalists die constantly in war zones? In fact, specifically Al Jazeera journalists who were killed while covering Middle East conflicts include the following. So are these journalists' lives any less valuable than the journalists who recently perished? And how do their families feel that the recent perish and killing of a journalist got so much international media and their children or their spouses or their fathers seem to get very little, if any? And not just Al Jazeera journalists. But if you look at the present conflict between Russia and Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine by the Russian-Ukrainian war that's going on, in the first month of the conflict, these 5 journalists were shot dead. Are their lives any less valuable? As of today, in the Russia-Ukraine war, 18 journalists have been killed. They're Russian, Ukrainian, Italian, American, Lithuanian, as well as Irish, an international slew of journalists. 13 have been seriously injured. 3 are just missing, they can't find them, and 8 have been kidnapped. Half of these 8 are women. What's the fate of these injured, missing, kidnapped, and why are they not getting the media attention that the one journalist killed in Israel got? Meanwhile, back in the USA, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib decides she's going to introduce a bill to basically condemn the establishment of the Jewish state in 1948 by calling it the Nakba. But there's no mention of the Jews butchered by Palestinians with axes now, last week, last month, as well as 1929. But why should we be surprised? After all, the squad is behind supporting Tlaib. And remember, this is the same squad who accused Trump's detention centers as being the same as concentration camps. And I don't quite see the analogy. These are the detention centers which pre-existed Trump and still exist. And to even loosely make analogy to the Holocaust is reprehensible. So the Tlaib resolution states that we should recognize the Nakba and Palestinian refugees' rights. It calls for the US to commemorate the Nakba, the recognition, not only historically, but as if Israel continues to do so. However, we know that that's not really the case, as we'll see shortly. Recognize the Nakba and Palestinians' refugee rights. They talk about the scars borne by close to 800,000 Palestinians, and this number is myth. So what's the truth? What's the reality behind this tragic event in history? The facts speak for themselves. A voluntary Arab exodus. They began leaving Israel as soon as the partition plan was called by United Nations to form Jewish and Arab states. The Jews accepted this plan, and the Arab armies rejected the plan, and went to war against the little new tiny Jewish state to kill the Jews and drive them into the sea. And the Arabs who left anticipated a quick Arab victory so they could return to their homes. And the rest is history. Meanwhile, as Talib speaks in America, a Western Democratic neighbor to the north is supporting dangerous extremists, inviting them and subsidizing their visit through the Muslim Association of Canada. The Muslim Association of Canada donated almost $300,000 to Ifran. Ifran, by the way, has donated almost $15 million to terrorist groups, including Hamas. And according to the Ottawa Citizen, members of the Muslim Association in Canada are also members of the Muslim Brotherhood. So at this upcoming delightful little conference, we're going to have several speakers, one of whom is Hatem Bazian, who said, why don't we have an intifada in this country? And the Jewish nation is a central myth of Zionism and it needs to be dismantled. And he's invited to come and speak to Canadian, impressionable young Canadians in particular. Let's hear what Hatem has to actually say. So we call him Hatem, not Hatem. So Hatem Bazian, with the emphasis on the hate. The message is don't be fooled by terrorists in suits. Hatem Bazian, take it away.
We are a majority and we should act and envision ourselves as the global majority. And we need to increase our participation politically. We need to take one neighborhood at a time. We need to take one neighborhood at a time.
We are many, they're few. We are many, they're few.
Our political leadership was born without a spine. We need to give them genetic mutation and constitute a Palestinian spine for them.
You need to count your days because the corruption that Israel represents will come to an end. Will come to an end.
There are a large number of Zionists who are engaged with Nazi Germany.
Zionism accepted to be the junior partner with the anti-Semitic European powers. We need to translate our strength into harassment of the political leadership. We need to harass them, have a civil disobedience.
We've been watching Intifada in Palestine, we've been watching an uprising in Iraq, and the question is that what are we doing? How come we don't have an Intifada in this country?
The time to rise up is today.
The only language that the slave master understands is the language of violence.
They're going to say it's the Palestinian being too radical. We haven't seen radicalism yet.
So that's the keynote speaker invited to come and talk to students of Canada. Another of the wonderful guests will be Fadel Saliman, who will also be speaking. And here he is.
هنا يحتاج أولادنا أن يعرفوا لماذا الإسلام فقط هو الذي يهاجم. لا أحد يهاجم اليهودية ولا يجرؤ أحد أن يهاجم اليهودية. قليل جدا من الناس من يهاجم المسيحية ولا يوجد أحد يهاجم الهندوسية رغم أنهم يعبدون الأبقار. لا أحد يهاجم إلا الإسلام فقط.
I don't know what parallel universe he's living in, but just look at the news and look at the Palestinians and look at the Israelis who are now getting slaughtered with knives, with axes, with rocks, as well as with M16 rifles.
يجب أن يعرف الناس لماذا الإسلام يهاجم. كل الأديان الموجودة أديان شعائرية تهتم في الأساس بالروحانيات والترانيم والأغاني والأذكار. ونحن في الإسلام عندنا روحانيات وعندنا أذكار، ولكن عندنا شيء غير موجود في أي دين آخر، وهو أنه دين المقاومة. هذا هو الدين الوحيد في العالم الذي يأمر أتباعه بمقاومة الفساد ومقاومة الظلم. فإذا ظن الناس أن الفساد والظلم سيتفرجان على الإسلام وهو يطلب من أتباعه ويأمرهم بمقاومتهما دون أن يهاجموا الإسلام فنحن سذج. لذلك على أولادنا أن يفهموا كلما يهاجم الإسلام علينا أن نشعر بالفخر أكثر. لأننا ننتمي لهذا الدين الذي يغيظ الفاسدين ويغيظ الكافرين ويغيظ الظالمين.
There are several other guest speakers, so I don't have time to show their videos, but just briefly to introduce them. We have Dunia Shoaib, who claims that ISIS burning prisoners is the same as what the American and Israeli militaries do. Another guest speaker will be Omar Abdal Kafi, who claims that Islam is loyal to Jews, but Jews have betrayed the Muslims. We have Imam Webb, who accuses Zionists of collaborating with Freemasons to spread corruption on earth. He's been banned from many countries from even being allowed to enter. And then we have Sheikh Nabulsi, who supports Palestinian suicide bombings and claims that all Jews are targets, and he supports the death penalty for homosexuality. That's a guest speaker in Canada at the Muslim conference. Anti-Semitism has crept out of the shadows. It's no longer hiding. Tonight's guest will present an affordable way to help combat this plague of international Jew hatred. So what is the plan? Brian's going to tell us a little more about it later, but let me first tell you a little more about Brian. Warm welcome to today's guest, who's going to be Brian Becker. Brian's a realtor extraordinaire in Israel with Harish Properties of Keller Williams in Israel. A little about our guest's background. He actually is from Silver Spring, Maryland, and made ALIYAH after attending the Berman Jewish Day School, which is a modern Orthodox school. At the age of 17, he found himself in Israel. He joined a pre-military program before serving as a medic in the IDF. And he focused his attention on real estate in Harish, Israel. Many people have not heard of Harish, Israel, me being one of them until I started researching it. So a little bit about Harish, Israel, which over 5,000 years ago was a bustling metropolis in the early Bronze Age. Did you know that, Brian? Thousands of inhabitants made their living from agriculture, extensive trade networks in different regions. They even traded with different kingdoms in the region. This was like the New York City of 5,000 years ago in the Bronze Age. In modern times, it first became a Nahal settlement. What that was basically a military settlement which served the first line of defense against the Arab invasions. The goal was to eventually become a civilian town, which in the early 1980s became a kibbutz, and which was disbanded in 1993. But this attractive location near Haifa combined low housing costs and soon attracted young couples. In fact, the cabinet of Israel has voted to spend $500 million shekels renovating the area and making it a master plan community. So what are the advantages of picking up, making ALIYAH, and moving to Harish? They're going to create a sustainable city, 400 million shekels for transportation infrastructure, as well as bicycle trails and public transportation. 100 million shekels for economic development. You can read this, but 74 million for public institutions, daycare centers, social services, science center, and youth activity center. These are some snapshots of Harish, as well as a master plan you can see up there next to Brian. Let's take a quick stroll through Harish. As Meir said, I prefer a powerful Jewish state that is hated by the entire world than an Auschwitz that's loved by one and all. Weinstein said the world's a dangerous place, not because of those who do evil, but because of those who look on and do nothing. And here in Israel now, we don't look on and do nothing. We're active, we're proactive, and we're providing a forum for people to give their opinion. Remember, there's a live chat. You can chat with us, send in your message, and we'll put it on the screen. So the Parsha of the week, Bekukotai, which will be discussed briefly by Meir. But what's important, isn't it, is we're told specifically in the Parsha that we will pursue our enemies and they will fall by the sword before us. Unfortunately, that's been the story of Judaism since its onset. Here's a little bit about the Parsha.
In this week's Torah reading of Bechukotai, there's a rough edge, 28 verses of curses that will befall the Jewish nation if we don't follow God's statutes. Included in the curses is the land not yielding its produce. For example, verse 32 states, I will make the land desolate so that Vishamanu aleh oivechem hayoshvim ba. It will become desolate for your enemies who live in it. The famous Spanish commentator Ramban writes that though this verse sounds like a curse, the land will be desolate, it's actually a blessing, in that the land will not yield its produce to our enemies. The Ramban writes in the 1300s, En artsenu mekabelet et oivenu. Our land does not accept our enemies. Me'az yatzanu mimena lo kibla uma v'lashon. Since we left the land, it hasn't accepted any nation. V'chulam mishtadlim le'oshiva ve'en le'el yadam. And all of them try to settle it without success. Is that true historically? Let's do a fact check. The Second Temple Roman historian Josephus writes about the abundance of the land in numerous places. Here's one example. It is an extremely fertile land, a land of pastures and many varieties of trees. The entire land is cultivated by its inhabitants, and not one stretch of earth is left uncared for. That's written during our sojourn there in Second Temple times. But when we are exiled, an about-face happens. Despite numerous settlement efforts by the Crusaders, the Mamelukes, the Turks, and the Arabs, they fail. The state of desolation replaces the abundance, and it's best depicted by Mark Twain in September 1867. He writes as he's horseback riding through the Jezreel Valley, there is not a solitary village throughout its whole extent, not for 30 miles in either direction. Of all the lands there are for dismal scenery, I think Palestine must be the prince. Palestine sits in sackcloth and ashes. Someone asks, what is the sign that the Jewish nation's return to the land is near? After a page and a half of discussion listing various signs, the Talmudic sage Rabbi Abba says the following: there is no clearer sign of the coming redemption than this verse. And you, the mountains of Israel, will produce your branches, and you will bear your fruit for my people Israel, because they are about to come. Indeed, today Israel grows over 40 types of fruits. For some of them, 50% of the yield is for export. We hold the world record for the amount of tomatoes grown per unit of land. In a hectare, which is 2.47 acres, Israel produces 300 tons of tomatoes. And where? In the Arava Desert, of all places. So there you have it, from abundance to desolation and back to abundance. As though it has a soul of its own, the land of Israel smiles to us through its produce. I live in Israel. I smile at the land every day. Hi, land. For those of you still in the diaspora, for whatever good reasons, how can you smile back to the land? By starting to plan your ALIYAH today. Shabbat Shalom from Beit El. Hey, you like Israel? You like Torah? Sign up for our Israel National Torah newsletter at the link on the screen.
Well, without any further ado, we're going to introduce Meir with the Parsha of the week. Here's Meir.
Hi, good evening, everyone. It's great to be with you. It's great that we have Brian Becker with us as well, who's an agent, a real estate agent, expert on Harish. That's one of the things that we want to encourage to our supporters, our friends, and Jewish community is move to Israel. Here's the deal. We're living in a different era today. It's extraordinary. I've been in Israel already for 2 months, and I have witnessed there's been a number of terror attacks that have taken place in Israel, severe. And also there's nonstop incitement during Ramadan on the Temple Mount by Hamas supporters, waving Hamas flags, calling for the murder and death of Jews, incitement all over the place. There have even been cases of Arab workers entering into Israel. They come from territories, and some Israeli Arabs, in fact, too, wearing T-shirts with M16s identifying with terrorists. And I mean, in most cases, these workers were sent home, told never come back. In some cases, never come back. Just over the weekend, in fact, this morning, I woke up to some fabulous news. And this is part of the era that we're in. Fabulous news is that the deal with Israel supplying gas to Europe is happening. Israel has a deal worked out with Egypt, of all countries, Egypt, a Muslim country, that Israel is going to be sending gas through Egypt to Europe. It's being finalized this summer, the entire deal with Europe, but they don't want to rely on Russia anymore because of this Russia-Ukraine war. They don't want to rely on Russia for their gas. So this is a boom for Israel. Israel is, as far as technology, all kinds of different types of technology, Israel is there. We've had over the weekend as well, 57 members of the U.S. Congress who have condemned Israel. They're calling on the U.S. government to no longer, they think that Israel is some kind of a charity, begging the United States for support, for financial support. So there's actually a strategic research and development agreement between the United States and Israel. It's not a foreign aid package anymore at all. And from the United States, it amounts to a little bit over $3 billion a year. And Israel's GDP is now almost $500 billion. So this is not even 1%. And it's research and development. So the United States wants the research and development technology from Israel. So what these 57 U.S. Congress people are saying is they want the United States to get weaker and weaker because countries are reaching out to Israel globally for the technology in Israel. When it comes to this reporter who was killed in Jenin, like I said, there was a wave of terror attacks in Israel. In fact, in one of the attacks, terrorists used axes to butcher Jews. And some of these terrorists in these attacks have come from Jenin, so the Israeli army was there to find the terrorist nest there and bring out justice. They were met with a hail of bullets from terrorist groups in Jenin, and this reporter lost her life as a result. I think there's a video that explains this as well. But yeah, and that's what they're actually sending out on social media. They're happy about it. They show on TikTok axes. They're thrilled with butchering Jews. So we have to speak the truth. We have to get that across. Remember, also there has been 2,658 journalists in the past 30 years that have been killed in war zones. The world doesn't say anything. These 57 Congress people haven't said anything about that. But with this particular journalist from Al Jazeera in Jenin, they say it because it involves Israel, because they are bent on their anti-Semitism and their double standards. Earlier today, it was announced that from the leader of a BDS group in Toronto, Canada, that their intent next week Sunday, to disrupt the annual UJA Toronto Walk for Israel. The BDS is intending to go there to disrupt it. It's alleged that the leader of this particular BDS group, CD4HR, is from Iraq. Just the past week, in the Iraqi parliament, they're trying to pass a motion, they're trying to pass a bill that anyone who is for normalization with Israel should be put to death. Can you believe it? That's what's going on there. So obviously, when the BDS comes out to try and disrupt a parade for Israel or a walk for Israel, you have to confront them, confront the hate, but you have to do it correctly. And we're going to be talking about that tonight, what the correct way is. The correct way is you get the accurate information out there. You stress the positive information. You stress the Abraham Accords that's going on right now. That has become a huge blessing for Israel. Muslim countries are reaching out to Israel and want to do business with Israel. And like I said, the deal is going through with Egypt. Relations are a lot better than ever with Egypt, and Israel is going to be supplying Europe with gas. The housing market in Israel is booming. A lot of people in North America, in particular, they're kind of nervous about moving to Israel. But they think it's out of sight. Everything is like Tel Aviv, and Tel Aviv, is the most expensive city in the world. That's a feather in the cap of Israel. That shows the success of Israel. But listen, if you can't afford Tel Aviv, there's all kinds of places in Israel that are extremely affordable and beautiful and gorgeous. And with a car, it's absolutely no problem. 20 minutes to the beach, the Mediterranean, and all the amenities that you want anyways in these smaller cities. So we're going to be talking about such a city. In fact, tonight, Harish. So we have Brian Becker with us, who lives in Harish, an agent. He came to Israel as a lone soldier, and his parents moved to Israel now, and it's absolutely great. I met him last week in Harish. He showed us around. It was fabulous. Where's Brian Becker?
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hey, Brian, how are you?
Doing
Great
fine,
to have
doing
you
well.
on. Great,
Thanks.
terrific. So it was fabulous when you took us around there and you showed us different apartments. We met your parents also, and great people, and beautiful apartment too. And tell us first, how did you get to Harish? And explain, how it is in Harish and affordability for people. And by the way, everyone, for his contact information, you can message us. No problem. We'll give it to you. He's from the States, from the US, so he speaks English. No problem. And he'll give you all the information. No pressure. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, thanks. To make a very long story somewhat short, I've moved 9 or 10 times in the 14 years I've been in Israel. So before Harish, we were living on a small yeshuv near Hebron, actually. And we were looking to move closer to family, et cetera, et cetera. But we both worked at home, so we didn't have a need to live in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. And neither me or my wife wanted to do that. We didn't want to live in a huge city like that and pay 7,000 shekel for a normal apartment. Or more. And so we were looking at a lot of places, actually, and we looked at Tiberias, and some other cheaper places that were still, city, had malls and things like that, etc. And we came to Harish, and I think the first apartment we saw, we said, if this is what all of the apartments are like in the city, then we're going to live here for sure. Because we were just so impressed. And in Israel, I'm sure it's hard to be impressed by building or plans, since so few things are planned in this country. So from that, I just decided that then I wanted to help other people do that, and made it into a business.
Terrific. Okay, so Give us an example of some of the apartments, how much they are to rent. Let's say rent right now, and we'll get on to purchasing and future
So
plans for the
first,
city also.
yeah,
Yes.
I'll give a short background on Harish.
Yeah.
So actually, in 2016, there were only 1,000 people living in Harish on one street called Gamla, and those, as you guys already explained, were the original like Nahal settlers of Harish, who were kind of moved to Harish in a very Zionistic attitude to settle the land. So in 2016, they started building, or they started building in 2014. People started moving in 2016. Fast forward 6 years, there's 40,000 people in Harish, with
Wow.
5 neighborhoods being built simultaneously right now. They just announced Harish Darom, which is South Harish, quote unquote, which is going to have 300,000 meters in commercial space. So offices, stores, malls, stuff like that. What I like about Harish is that they're aggressively advertising, if I can put it bluntly. And I like that. And I think all places in Israel should be doing that, right? We should be growing this country. I'm obviously coming at this from a Zionist perspective. And unfortunately, not all cities do that in Israel. Can you hear me, Meir?
Yeah, we can hear you clear, Cloud. Your
Awesome.
sounds good. Your picture's good. Just keep moving along. You're doing great.
Yeah, no problem. So right now in Harish, just to give a little stats about the city besides the community, there are over 150 gans, so plenty of places to put your kids for those with larger families. We have the highest percentage of under 18s in the country. 65% of the city is under 18, with 20 or 21%, I believe, under 5 years old. 20 lower schools. There's 2 or 3 high schools being built right now at the same time, from all the different walks of life, whether it be secular, religious, Chabad, Haredi. And I would say the best part about the city, or the part that I like the most, is that the housing is both affordable and new. So all the housing comes with parking spots, storage units, beautiful new balconies, master bedrooms with a walk-in bath and shower, and new, or I guess Yad Shtai, secondhand, but secondhand is a year or 2 old in Harish. 3 bedrooms start at about 1.4 million shekel, and 4 bedrooms at about 1.5 million shekel, which anybody who's looked at buying something somewhere like Beit Shemesh or Jerusalem or Nana or Herzliya will know is half, if not even less, than something similar in those cities of similar quality. And also, as you mentioned before, with the new investment in Harish and Bennett and ALIYAH Shaked visiting here, the transportation, the purchasing power of Harish has really grown, in that we now have buses essentially everywhere, direct to Tel Aviv, Netanya, Caesarea, Hadera. You could get the train in Pardes Chana. Lots of bigger brand name stores and banks are moving to Harish. All of the major healthcare providers are represented here. So it's really a very bustling new city, and it's just a fun place to be.
What is the people who are looking, let's say, to initially rent for buying? What's the average rent there for, let's say, a 3-bedroom apartment?
So a 3-bedroom apartment is around 3,000 shekel a month. Again, new 3-bedroom with a nice balcony, parking spot, storage unit, everything.
So anyone who's watching from Canada, because I could calculate that in Canadian dollars, that's about $1,100 Canadian a month. Unbelievable. Go on.
I think that the more unique thing about Harish would be, I mean, that's cheap. and it's great value. It's good for younger families who are looking to save up. It's hard enough to purchase a house in Israel. A, the prices, and B, the fact that you need 25 or 30% down. So it's hard enough to save, but it's difficult to live in a place like Tel Aviv in a 2-bedroom when you have a family. But a place like Harish allows you to actually live in a nice place with enough space, but also save and feel safe in a good community. I think, again, the unique thing would be that you can get a penthouse here, like a very large penthouse or garden apartment for around 500 or 5,000 shekel, which would get you an older 2-bedroom in most other cities.
That's incredible. No, it's great you took us around. One of the things that really strikes me also is the amenities in the city. That there are malls there are restaurants there, there's shopping there. You have everything you need. You got public transportation.
Plenty of restaurants, 95% kosher.
Yep.
Just because that's most of the most people here are either what's called here Masorti, like culturally or Dati Leumi. But yeah, definitely plenty of options. I mean, Pizza Hut came to Harish, which is like news in Harish. That's our recent news, our recent restaurant, Greg.
Right. Excellent. How far is it roughly from the Mediterranean, Harish?
So there's a few places. There's a few places you could go to the beach. You could go to the beach in Hadera or Caesarea. Either one is 30 minutes, even less without traffic. There's a lot of places around Harish too. Now, even a year ago, I couldn't say this, but now there's a lot of shopping within Harish, like I was saying before, a lot of big brand name stores coming in.
Right.
But even just 5 minutes outside Harish, I mean, within a 15-minute drive, you have 3 or 4 shopping centers, I guess what you would call like an outlet mall. And then 30 minutes away, you're already at the beach in Hadera, golfing in Caesarea, Haifa, 40 minutes.
Or visiting Netanyahu in Caesarea and having lunch with him.
Yeah, I heard he needs friends.
Man, no, it's okay. So I met your parents who moved to Harish. How are they enjoying Harish?
So yeah, thank God my parents made ALIYAH about 8 months ago. And they're living here in Harish, actually in a different neighborhood than me, closer to the main street, so that they can walk around, which they do often. They love it. They like that it's cheap and affordable. Not cheap because that almost makes the quality sound low. They're very happy.
Affordable,
that it's affordable essentially, and their quality of life on the income that they have is very high compared to even where they were in America. As you know, some places in the States, Toronto obviously, are getting so expensive that it's just not realistic to live a good life there on a certain or below a certain income. So they love it, and they love that they can walk everywhere, that everything, they don't have a car, but they very rarely leave Harish. Everything is here. All their doctor's offices, pharmacies, all the restaurants that they like, food they like to order, the supermarkets. So Harish has everything walking distance. It's very unique in that way. And it's very planned, obviously, which is unique for Israel. I lived in Herzliya for years, and Herzliya and other cities around there are just not planned very well. So you end up with 10 main streets. And so in Harish, you have one main street, but you also have kind of little supermarket shopping centers in each neighborhood. So even if you are far from the main street, you have the basics: a supermarket, a makolet, which is like a corner store. So yes, I like it. It's very convenient, and they love it for the same reason. They also were looking for somewhere that was not. People in Israel always ask for a place that's a 30-minute drive to the beach, and I always say most places in Israel are a 30-minute drive to the beach. Even if you're in the south, you can go to Ashkelon or.
Here's a little sneak preview of Caesarea Beach from a drone shot that you might enjoy. Okay, enough of that. Back to you guys.
Nice. Yeah, about a month ago, that was the first time I went to Harish. Went with a friend of mine, and then we wanted to drive and see what the drive was like to the beach in Hadera and the beach in Caesarea. So it was a short drive actually, and yeah, like the video showed, it's a wonderful beach in Caesarea, and it's so close.
I do want to add actually that there is the Anglo community here, while it's small right now, although it's actually grown a lot in the last 6 months or so, is very active to the point where this is very new. They're trying to build a shul. I mean, right now there's a non-permanent place where the English speakers meet every few weeks to daven together. But there's a WhatsApp group and a Facebook group, very active, helping each other, meeting up for barbecues, Yom Ha'atzmaut, or Shabbat picnics, stuff like that. So definitely anybody that wants to also even come for a Shabbat to Harish is more than welcome to be in touch.
Right. That's great. That's great. I think I'm part of one of the groups on Facebook, in fact, for an Anglo group for his pretty friendly people, and that's great. So how does it feel to be part of the? I mean, it's unbelievable, the transformation of Israel that it has. The trajectory is just everything amazing with Israel, technology-wise, and the economy. And the real estate and the opportunities and more ALIYAH, more interest in ALIYAH going on. And you're right there and watching this. I mean, on the one hand, it's a job, and everybody has to make a living what they do, and you got your 9 to 5 or 8 to 6 or whatever it is. Got to earn a living, but I think it takes on a different dimension doing it in Israel. That if you're able to make a living and assist Jews coming and living in Israel, it's like a double or triple mitzvah. It's like an unbelievable thing. So tell us.
So yeah, I definitely love that aspect. People would always ask me, because I move so much, about different places when they were thinking of buying, and I would help them. So I kind of obviously moved into it from that. But I would say, actually, on that note, one of the more interesting things is I do have people that are buying, from the States that don't live here yet, that they're buying it. They say, okay, I want to have an apartment, and I'm going to make ALIYAH when we retire in 5 years, 10 years, or when the kids are out of the house.
Yep.
And so, but they want to lock in a very cheap price, right? So they're buying in Harish and they're renting it out. And some of those clients I've obviously become more friendly with, and they send me messages of stuff that's happening to them. And obviously once they buy a house in Israel, then they're very, that kind of ignites the Zionism, and they You have all of a sudden they're more into it, obviously. And they just send me some of these things that happen in their community that aren't so positive, obviously,
Right.
like things, anti-Semitic things, essentially, that happen to their kids or someone else in the community, or at their shul, someone wrote a message or something like that. And it just inspires me. I always write back, pack your bags.
Right.
What do you,
Right.
come join us. We have places here, so that part inspires me, obviously, to work harder on it, and get more Olim, obviously, to move to Israel, not necessarily just Harish, but Israel in general.
I think maybe what's needed is a little bit of a shakeup in the Jewish agency, or the Minister of Diaspora Affairs, that they really have to tackle this to really promote in a big way ALIYAH. Maybe you need the right people that are going to start promoting it. So on the one hand, you want to hear it from the rabbis in diaspora to promote it. On the other hand, Israel, a successful country like Israel, and only getting stronger and better in every regard, needs the right people in the Jewish agency to facilitate, not just to facilitate, but to promote ALIYAH. That has to be done. So hopefully the right people.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'd like to see a push from ALIYAH from Jewish schools in America, if I'm not going too far overboard.
Right.
I definitely believe that's important. People need to know that it's not only okay, but a desirable thing. I mean, a Jew in the Jewish community to do that, and maybe it's not always clear.
The biggest blow or answer to the anti-Semitism today and the BDS today is moving to Israel, making Israel stronger, bringing your families to Israel and starting families in Israel, and that's what they detest. And one of the reasons I heard for the terror attacks is to try to, just one of the reasons, there's a number of reasons, but try to dissuade Jews from moving to Israel. Give a perception that it's a very dangerous place to move to, and but they fail. Israel has a strong army. They're everywhere. They do what they have to do. Israel's not above criticism. We have our criticisms, but definitely there's a strong army in Israel, and there's the will to. We're defending this land. Jews are defending Israel 100%, and like I said at the start, I arrived here about 2 months ago, and there's been like this surge in terrorist attacks that have happened. And during Ramadan, we heard all the anti-Semitic garbage from happening on the Temple Mount during Ramadan, and nonetheless, that is the answer. And I see Jews in Israel, all over the place in Israel, going about their lives. Restaurants are busy. People are going out on the streets. It's happening. It's lively here. Beaches are full. Also, weather's great. Beaches are full. Hotels are full, and we're going on with our lives. And no, we're not intimidated, and we know what the answer is, and we're not. And no one's leaving either. No one is packing it in, leaving. There's a leading rabbi in the United States who spoke at a dinner for the Meir Yeshiva recently, and he said at the dinner he believes within 15 years, 75% of religious Jews in the United States will move to Israel within 15 years. It's quite a statement, and he based that on that there's nonstop anti-Semitism growing in the United States, in diaspora. And in Israel, the Jewish communities are thriving. So hopefully I'll have a lot more business.
Definitely seeing a lot of younger couples where I feel like I'm only 31, but I feel like in the past, people made ALIYAH maybe older age on average.
Right.
I'm definitely seeing a lot of, and maybe it's just because it's Harish and it's cheap here, and that's where they can afford to start their lives. But I'm definitely seeing a lot of young couples not only moving to Israel, but moving to sort of like the non-traditional areas to kind of make their own. They want to move to Israel and be part of Israel. Obviously, these are mostly religious, or they care about Israel, obviously, and they want to kind of make their own way in Israel. So I definitely see that in action.
Right. Well, it's amazing.
Makes me happy.
Brian, listen. Can we show his contact information on the screen, Doctor?
We can do that. Give me a minute, and I'll get it on there.
Perfect. Because people should, be in touch with you, and I think it's very positive if people know about you, because people feel more comfortable from the United States or from Canada to deal with someone who is from the West, who speaks fluent English. So there's no confusion there.
You can certainly go to his Facebook page where there's links to all of these sites. You could actually, if you just go into a search engine, I was pleasantly surprised, put his name in, and you can find all the different stuff about his history, about niche. And to my surprise, hey, there's a realtor named Brian William in Galveston, Texas also, just so you know. So it's pretty easy to figure out which was which. But here's his Facebook. And also on our chat, somebody, Tracy, unsolicited.
Oh, I see it. Yes.
You're welcome to send me a private, and anyone who's interested is more than welcome to send me a private message on Facebook, even if you just have questions in general about real estate, or you need help with finding a lawyer or mortgage advisor.
Here too, there's also just, you want to go to his Facebook page, courtesy of L. Tracy Oliver, whose name also is my name, but that's another story.
Yes.
So there you have it.
Perfect. Brian, I want to thank you for joining us tonight. Any final words that you could leave our viewers?
I highly advise all young especially, but everybody, essentially every Jew outside of Israel, to hastily make their way here, or at least start the preparations to get here. Because this is our true homeland, and I personally will not stop my work until that happens.
So I have a question for you. In Harish, if somebody had dual citizenship and perhaps wants an apartment, a small studio, but they only plan to live there maybe 3 months a year, are there options and people there who would be rental agents for someone else's property who lives in North America?
Definitely. I could accommodate that, or someone else in my office, but I don't see any reason that.
No, we don't want someone else in your office. We want you.
No, I'm joking. Obviously, that can be accommodated. There is a very active rental market here. Actually, there's a high demand for short-term rentals here, simply because most of the people who bought originally were young couples, and now that Harish is more established, there's a kind of this effect of 5 years later of all of their parents who are at retirement age need places to stay or are looking to just rent for a year. And there's also a lot of the Olim here. There's a lot of Anglo Olim and Spanish and Russian, French, and their families come for Chagim. But there's only there aren't that many rental options here because there's no hotel, so it's only Airbnb.
So what if somebody wanted to purchase a studio apartment, for example, somebody from South Texas, and only plan to live there a few months a year? Can my property, if I were to do that, be rented out by an agent in Israel?
Absolutely.
Again, if I own something. So just rough ballpark figure, what's a studio apartment? Say Israel now wanted to get together and we wanted to have a property. So what are we talking about for a purchase cost of a studio apartment in one of the new buildings in Harish?
So actually in Harish, there are no one-bedroom apartments.
Okay.
There are two-bedroom apartments. The cheapest unit right now in Harish would be the older 2 bedrooms on Gamla Street. Now, I do want to mention something interesting. There's something called Pinui Banui, which is essentially that a constructor will come in and demolish the building, and they build a new building, obviously a lot taller, and they sell the extra units, but the owners of the previous apartments get a new unit.
You said the real estate agent is a lot taller than you? You said it's a lot taller. Oh, the building is a lot taller.
The building is a lot taller.
I got you. Yeah.
More floors, and that's how they make their money, but you get essentially a new apartment. Now, that could be years down the road, but you can buy a 2-bedroom apartment there for about 900,000 shekel, 950,000 shekel, but the newer units started around 1.2 million for a 2-bedroom.
How about the cost of a building which isn't yet completed, but they're already selling apartments in it?
So there is actually a very new project in Harish right now, which I'm attempting to get a group of Anglos or Olim to buy together. And they have 2 bedrooms. These are all new: balconies, storage units, parking spots. 2 bedrooms starting at 1.2 million, and 3 bedrooms starting at 1.35 million. And these are also with a view, a fabulous view of the forest. Very small building, so only 14 units in a building. And it's also, the location is right next to the new country club that's going to be built in Harish.
Well, I've contacted Nefesh B'Nefesh, so once that goes through, I'll contact you next. Back to you two.
More than happy to hear from you.
Oh, excellent. Listen, that's really helpful to everyone. So, Brian, I want to thank you again for coming. We'll probably have you on another 4 times for this, because it's really exciting, and this is really, we're dedicated to fighting anti-Semitism, and with that is, supporting Israel in every way we can, and promoting moving to Israel. And it's wonderful that you're there representing what's going on in places such as Harish, and it's a wonderful opportunity for Jews to move forward and make plans to move to Harish. Extremely affordable, not far from anything, all the amenities, everything there. I mean, just have to make the move. That's it. Just check it out.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you very much. Okay, so usually we conclude with a song. Does the doctor in the studio have a song keyed up for?
I do. Right before that, just which you've emphasized, but those in Northern America who are watching NPR or CNN who don't get the full picture, every day there's another incident which basically an Israeli, a Jew, the military get attacked. And then the propaganda. So I can't help to show. I'm going to show that quick little video of this 17-year-old boy, if that's okay, before the music. Just not to end on a sad note, but end it on the propaganda. So I thought I'd just refresh memory that. So there was a headline, which many of you may have seen, which basically said Israeli forces kill a Palestinian boy in a Jenin raid. And of course, that's what you get on Al Jazeera, Middle East Eye, as well as NPR, and even Haaretz newspaper wasn't quite accurate, although they were a little better. So nobody can possibly argue the fact that this situation is tragic when a 17-year-old boy, and it's declared by the Palestinian Prime Minister that a shooting was another crime against the resident of Jenin. But again, they leave out the important parts of the story. This is true, and it is a tragedy. But of course, the fact that this young boy and his friends were hurling firebombs and opened fire on Israeli police with M16 rifles is also somewhat relevant to the story, and that gets left out. And not only that, but Hamas actually glorified him. They can't even keep with the propaganda. So I'll show you a little video which features this young Palestinian boy. I might add that his 2 uncles both have been involved in terrorist activities, and both are dead because of similar activities, and that's the environment that he's raised in. These are more children who pick up rocks or stones or firebombs or M16, or now axes and knives and attack Israelis. So I'm not sure how the international community thinks we should respond when a firebomb is tossed at a policeman. And here he is, again, before the tragedy. And how are they supposed to grow up when this is terrorists in training at a Palestinian Authority after-school activity this is not Hamas, this is not Islamic Jihad, this is a Palestinian school and the Palestinian Authority in our Judea and what they call the West Bank. So for those who can't see the small picture, it's 4 Palestinian children dressed up as Jews with their head covers and with yarmulkes, and they're strolling aimlessly. And there's another Palestinian child. They're practicing murdering Jewish civilians in the streets. And then they yell, "Mommy, mommy," in Hebrew. So how is this young teenager, this 17-year-old boy, going to grow up not hating Jews if he's indoctrinated from the time he was a child? So Meir, I'll give you the closing words and I'll bring up some music about making ALIYAH.
Okay. Well, listen, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Please share this on your different platforms that you use as well. And listen, come to Israel, check out places such as Harish. Extremely affordable, doable for your families, for yourself, whether you're coming younger age or older or close to retirement. Don't think about, especially like in the winter time, spending half a year in Florida, snowbirds, or whatever the term is. Spend your time in Israel. The opportunity is great to come to Israel and check it out. Do what you got to do here. Life is vibrant in Israel, and it's Jewish. This is where it's at. This is where you need to be. Thank you very much. And next week we'll be back, and there's a lot of information we got to get across on a variety of topics. Thank you.
Left it all to be with you. Distant dreams have now come true. Walk the streets of legends told. We've come home. We've come home. We've come home. And we'll never stand alone. After 2,000 years, we are home. Not a native of this land. Bring me up and take my hand. Sapphire seas and golden sand. A place called home. We've come home. We've come home to a land of our own. After 2,000 years, we are home. על אדמתי שרדתי, עברי עתידי, זה ביתי. are home.
קולות בלבב בנימה
נפש יהודי
הומייה
ותח מזרח קדימה
עין לציון צופיה עוד לא אבדה תקוותנו התקווה בשנות 2000 להיות החופשי בארצנו ארץ ציון ירושלים להיות החופשי בארצנו ארץ ציון ירושלים.
Shalom aleinu ve'al kol